Welcome to Virginia Tech's Next Frontiers of Space event. I'm Kevin LeClaire, Virginia Tech Industrial and Systems Engineering class in 1995. I serve as the chair of the Industry Advisory Board for Virginia Tech Center for Space Science and Engineering Research, better known as Space at VT. Space at VT is a leading space research and workforce training organization that provides Virginia Tech students with truly out-of-this-world opportunities, designing innovative hardware, conducting leading-edge research, and developing space missions. Virginia Tech students work on satellites, lunar missions, sounding rockets, high-altitude platforms, drones, ground stations, observatories, and much more. Space at VT is led by a multidisciplinary team of experts that is winning significant space research and development grants and contracts. The center collaborates with industry to provide valuable hands-on experience and training that prepares Virginia Tech students to become the next generation of leaders in the space industry. I'm very excited for everything that Virginia Tech is doing in space. Please help us get the word out and check out the newly launched online research to learn how alumni and companies can get involved and make a difference advancing space science and engineering and the talent and research for tomorrow at Virginia Tech. Stay tuned at the end of the video to learn more. So let's kick off this event as we hear from some amazing Virginia Tech alumni leaders who've made great advancements in space. You may recognize the voiceover as Virginia Tech's very own Homer Hickam, class of '64, author, Vietnam War veteran, and former NASA engineer. Welcome, Homer.
The dream of slipping the bonds of gravity to escape Earth and venture into space has inspired humanity for centuries, uniting scientists, explorers, and dreamers, accelerating technological advancement and propelling new worlds of research and development. Hokies have played key roles in the world's advance beyond the clouds, flying as astronauts, leading missions from the ground, and participating in the thousands of support and science roles required to launch humans into space and bring them back safely.
Perseverance right now is still fairly new in its explorations. It's just past its 100th day on the surface and is just finishing up the instrument and rover checkout procedures. So it actually hasn't started the detailed analysis of the science results on the surface yet, but really is just validating that all the instruments survived and the rover itself survived the trip to Mars intact, unbroken, and is all functioning properly. One good example is on the Perseverance rover mission, there's an experiment, another technology experiment called MOXIE. And MOXIE's purpose is to demonstrate that we can have a small autonomous chemical processing package that can suck in that Martian atmosphere, condense it to a higher pressure, chemically extract the oxygen from it, and store that oxygen as pure oxygen separately for utilization by any number of different systems after that. And we've actually already run MOXIE on the surface of Mars and validated that it does indeed work. So that tells us that we have a potential oxygen resource that could be utilized by future missions, including a human mission.
It's amazing how critical space-based assets are to U.S. national security and to our economic security. Space assets give us access to critical intelligence on our adversaries and on developments of interest around the world, whether it's troop movements or leadership communications. They allow us to track changes on the ground over time. For example, satellite images allowed us to detect construction in North Korean nuclear facilities, even when the government in Pyongyang denied such efforts. They also allow instantaneous and global transmission of critical military, intelligence, and diplomatic communications, which enable the United States to respond rapidly to emerging developments. And space assets are also critical to the functioning of the US economy. GPS satellites don't just enable Google Maps on your iPhone, they enable real-time tracking of goods, vehicles, and aircraft.
If you look at where we're going now with certainly with Blue Origin and some other companies that are really making access to space orders of magnitude more affordable, like those previous space tourists, I think you're looking at north of $100 million if you're going to get on anything that's available today. This next generation, including our New Shepard rocket and and other vehicles out there are going to be a lot cheaper than that. So you won't see 10 people the next decade. I mean, we'll put 6 people up on the first flight on July 20th, right? And so we're going to be putting 6 tourists up at a time, and we'll fly that thing easily a dozen times a year. So the point being is, I think as you play out over the next decade, it'll be now hundreds, maybe even over 1,000 people will have flown to space by the year 2030. And the way I like to think of it is, there's a pretty decent chance that my kids or their friends, like my kids will know somebody that will have flown on these things, but certainly my grandkids, it'll be as common. I don't know, what do you say? Maybe as common as hang gliding and mountain climbing, some of the other things where, are reasonably accessible. Does 50% of the population go hang gliding? No. But it's not the kind of thing where you look at and say, man, it's an impossibility. So I think we're going to get to thousands. Beyond that, the tens and hundreds of thousands are quite realistic in my lifetime.
They benefit life on Earth in so many ways. So I'll start with the technical ways. Everything from the inventions that NASA makes, whether it's temper foam, if you have a temper foam mattress for yourself or your puppies, that was invented at NASA. The cameras that are in your cell phone were invented for the space program by an inventor at JPL. So there's very tangible benefits of the space program to your everyday life. CAT scans and MRIs are based on technology that was developed for NASA. And so the inventions and the technology that we develop improve lives on Earth. On aeronautics, every time you get into an airplane and go somewhere, which hopefully we'll be doing again soon, we're there with you when you fly. Especially at Ames, we develop air traffic management tools so that we can get you there quicker. We can avoid storms and we can save fuel. And we're looking at green aviation, electric aircraft, so that we can not contribute to climate change as much. So those are very tangible benefits of NASA technology to your everyday life. And then there's the intangibles, right? I think one of the things that NASA provides is inspiration. I think we inspire the world. And we inspire the world to be better, to do better. We inspire the world to go further, to explore the unknown. And I think that's part of what it means to be human, is to wonder and to discover and to continue to uncover the mysteries of the universe. And I think that's a very human, belonging, important aspect of what we do.
I think we're learning that some of these really big systems that we had before might not be the best way to do things, especially when you consider how hard it is to replenish those really big systems. So instead, if we have some smaller systems that might not be quite as capable, but may be able to work in collaboration with a bunch of different satellites, now you have a system that can be as robust as those bigger systems. But easier to refresh, easier to launch, and a little bit more resilient, because if one part of the satellite fails, one small satellite fails, it might not be that big of a deal. Whereas if you have something go wrong on one of these really big satellites, you've lost your entire system. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity out there, a lot of different business cases that people are looking at, and I think that small satellites are here to stay.
As a young person, I read a lot of science fiction growing up, and then in 1957, when I was 14 years old, the Russians launched the Sputnik, the world's first Earth satellite, and that so impressed me, I decided to build my own rockets, which I did during the 3 years of high school. And those rockets allowed me to go on to the National Science Fair and come back with a gold medal. After that, I went to Virginia Tech and learned how to be an engineer. Did a few other things before I finally got to NASA, but once I was at NASA, I dearly loved my job. I woke up every morning and said, "Oh boy, I get to go work for NASA today," and it was a lot of fun. And I worked on some very interesting missions, such as the Hubble Space Telescope and training the first Japanese astronauts. But ultimately, I decided to write a book that was titled Rocket Boys, which was about those 3 years in high school. And it did so well, and I already had 30 years of federal service. I decided to retire and become a full-time writer.
So one of the interesting things when I came into NASA a little over a year ago, they have been on a journey in the support functions for a few years now to just, become more efficient and effective, try to continuously improve and make sure that we're serving the agency and the missions better. And so part of what that looks like is there are 10 NASA centers. And as in, many organizations, again, the one I came from was sort of in a similar place where each of those centers had their own finance and IT and procurement and human capital organizations. And NASA determined that, a more effective way to kind of run the support would be to run it at an enterprise level and make sure that each center then got what they needed. And so we've been on that journey for about 3 years now, getting ready to finish that. And so that's been a bit of a culture shift. We're trying to figure out how do you best serve the enterprise and make use, for instance, of all the great people across the country with the different skills and knowledge that they have, so that they're not limited to just working at one center. But again, historically, they have really worked for one center. And so you might hear somebody say, I'm a Kennedy employee or I'm a Johnson employee. It's like, yes. And we're all NASA employees. So we're really working through the culture change.
It takes about 2 hours to go through the checklist and everything before you take off. You're lying there on your back and there's no stimuli, there's no dials in the middeck to look at or nothing to do. And so it was close to a minute before you take off. They test what they call the APUs, which are some hydraulic pumps that are in the bottom that pump the fluid, the fuel into the rockets and stuff. And it sort of made the shuttle tremble a little bit. And I thought, this is cool. We're getting close. And then 6 seconds before you take off, the main engines that fire, those 3 big engines in the back of the shuttle. And it starts shaking you a little bit like you're riding a bicycle down a dirt road. And then the solids ignite. And when the solids ignite, you instantly go to about 2.3 times the force of gravity. And it pushes you, you're lying on your back. And it pushes your internal organs back against your rib cage. And your lungs, which are sort of balloon-like, are compressed and flattened out a little bit. And so breathing in is really hard when you're taking off. But for me, I was so excited. I was going, yahoo, whoopee, going to space today, guys, yahoo. But with no air in my lungs and 2.3 G pushing me back in the seat, it's probably a lot more like, yeah, we're going to space today, guys, whoa, or something like that. So, but anyway, it takes you 2 minutes for the solids to burn out. And you go back to 1 times the force of gravity, and then it builds back up to 3 times the force of gravity, and you throttle back to not go higher than that because that's the design limit on the shuttle. And a little over 8 minutes, you're in orbit going 17,500 miles an hour, which is about 10 times the speed of a rifle bullet. So it's really fast.
We had some anomalies on our mission. We had a large piece of foam break away from the side of the vehicle in a protuberance airload ramp, a POW ramp. Just missed our left wing. It would have been very critical if we got hit with that piece of foam. We hit a large buzzard on launch that luckily fell on the backside of the external tank that could have caused a problem. Another thing that was really critical was that when we did our rotational, our R-bar maneuver, basically when we're getting ready to dock with space station, a new maneuver, we basically do a backflip. Eileen commands a backflip, and the people on space station at that time, John Phillips and Sergei Krikalev, basically photographing the vehicle. as we do this backflip to basically inspect the bottom of the vehicle, see if there's any damage. And so what we noticed on the ground that there was a very small piece of gap filler, like a thin felt-like material that's in between all of the thousands of shuttle tiles on the belly of the vehicle. It was sticking out in two places, about a half an inch. And the amazing people on the ground, some of my good friends in the Friends of Charlie network at NASA Langley, they were able to determine when they saw this gap filler sticking out that if we didn't do an emergency EVA, an emergency spacewalk, and pull that gap filler, that when we flew back in through the Earth's atmosphere at Mach 25, 18,000 miles an hour, it would trip the boundary layer and these vortices would shed, would hit our wings and burn our wings up. So that was pretty exciting.
It's not just companies. Obviously, in the U.S., you see companies and nations across the planet getting into space. So as we all get up there, we're going to have to develop some framework for international agreements that that protect each other's assets and rights. So I don't know exactly what that framework needs to look like. I mean, if I look at an analogy here on Earth, maybe there's something to be learned from the maritime environment, but I think it is going to take something that we need to work on, and so hopefully we'll get that done.
As space operations have become more complex, the military needs personnel who can execute specialized mission-critical functions, such as developing military space doctrine, acquiring space systems, monitoring the location of satellites and space debris, and providing space capabilities in support of military operations. So rather than spread these competencies across all the military services, which is what we had been doing, it really made sense to consolidate them in a single service dedicated to space capabilities.
To do it, to actually be able to fly in that weird environment with very, very low pressure, thin atmosphere environment on Mars, the biggest differences we had, the biggest technological challenges we had to overcome, where if you look at Ingenuity, it's basically very, very small, very, very lightweight. It only weighs just under 4 pounds. It's about 1.2 meters across in the blade diameter. It's 2 counter-rotating blades on a single powered shaft that provide the lift. But the one thing you would immediately notice versus a terrestrial helicopter, a helicopter here on Earth, typically the rotor speed is somewhere between 300 to 400 RPM. To get lift on Mars in this really thin atmosphere, these rotors have to spin really, really fast, a lot closer to 3,000 to 3,500 RPM. So this thing basically sounds like a lawnmower when it's flying because the blades are spinning so fast. The other thing is they're very, very wide in comparison to their length. So these big fat blades spinning really, really fast to generate lift that's just barely sufficient to get us up and off the ground and have stable controlled flight. And that last little bit actually was the really important one. The thing that we found, because you have this extremely light aircraft in an extremely thin atmosphere, it was very, very difficult to control. We actually tried the same way, for example, you would have someone flying a hobby drone here on Earth with doing real-time joysticking. And we actually have a test chamber at the Jet Propulsion Lab that we can pump down to the same atmospheric pressure as that on Mars. And we stuck a test helicopter in there and tried to have a human fly it. And it was basically impossible. We had somebody who was very, very experienced in flying small UAVs. And the thing was so unstable that he just couldn't get it to fly for more than a second or two before it would come crashing down. And so we needed a control system that was very, very fast, very responsive, to be able to fly and be controlled and be stable and sustain flight. So a lot of different things that went into making this whole thing work. But the end result was it did work, and it has now flown at this point 6 times. We're getting ready for our 7th flight coming up.
I think the way you have to think about it is the whole purpose of having public, government funded projects is in areas where the barrier is really, really high for the private sector to kind of overcome. And so that's kind of defined the history of the whole space program up until really the last decade. You think about it, space was the purview of countries. And even at that, very few countries have been able to really do meaningful things in that area. But now, as you see, what we call Space 2.0, the big companies like Blue Origin that are kind of coming in with some fresh ideas, it's kind of changing things. And you want that to happen because real markets eventually need to be ones that have vibrant private segments to them. That's what brings a lot of innovation. That's ultimately what brings scale. And so, as you go through this next period, you're going to see really great partnerships because there's going to be a lot of situations where the private sector can really go and do these things. But you're going to see others where you're going to need some of that partnership with the NASAs of the world and other public institutes to really do those audacious, big next kind of steps in this kind of overall journey of putting people out in space.
Now, I can't tell you exactly what year it's going to happen. All of us are working towards a goal of making it happen sometime in the next decade. I firmly believe that the first human to set foot on Mars has already been born, is already out there, is studying in school right now, and who knows, it may be some of the students there at Tech. And I would love it if that were the case.
I mean, my message to everybody is just don't quit. Just keep trying and learn a lesson for each time the results don't come out like you thought they would, and use that lesson to do better the next time. And that's regardless of your major. I think that if you listen to all these guys that are billionaires now, you go back to Edison or Henry Ford or Tesla or any of those brilliant guys, we think they failed over and over and over. But the failure would have been if they quit. And so that's the main thing.
Well, here's the thing about Virginia Tech is that those of us who went through it, whether in the military system or as a civilian, we all identify as family. We are a family. There's no question about that. Ultimately, somewhere along the line, you realize that you miss that other family, that family that you had at Virginia Tech. And the really neat thing is that family is waiting for you. And when you turn back to it and start getting involved with whether you're on campus or just interested in what's going on in campus, you start recognizing a lot of the names and a lot of your fellow alumnus, and pretty soon you get involved. And so the Virginia Tech family is always waiting for you.
I was lucky enough while I was a student there at Tech, my advisor was George Gorsline. And I was able to tap into his head several different times during my undergraduate career and learn a lot of different things. The first one was, he was very clear about making sure that we all understood, don't stovepipe yourself. Yeah, you may be here because you want to get a computer science degree and you're going to do a certain number of computer science classes and learn about that. But make sure you learn about as many different broad topic areas in other disciplines as you possibly can, because you have absolutely no idea right now how useful that stuff is all going to be later on in your career.
Yeah, the one thing really is to consider federal service. I sit on the board of Pamplin's management department, and I'm the only federal board member. And so I love to play the role of please consider federal service. It's not something that I had planned. Again, as I said, I kind of lucked into that first job. And now knowing what I know about the federal government, having worked there for 33 years, there's just so much opportunity in the government across every career field, and the ability to really, if you have a passion for something like the environment, or science or people, you can find any federal agency really and align your passion with the work.
I would just say, pursue your dreams. You're getting a great foundation in education, personally and professionally. Excuse me. You are learning the skills needed to solve the world's most difficult problems, whether it's clean air, clean water, space exploration, energy. The world needs you. And I would encourage you to seize the day, take the hard job, always take the hard job. Always take the job that you don't think you're ready for. Always take the job that you're unsure about, because guess what? You will rise and you will meet the challenge and you will surprise yourself along the way. So seize the day.
I hope you enjoyed this glimpse into how fellow Hokies are making an impact in space. I encourage you to view the full interviews, which provide inspiring insight into their accomplishments and how Virginia Tech has made an impact on them professionally and personally. To learn more about Space at VT and the newly launched corporate space website, click on the description below. Thank you for joining us. Go Hokies.